The year is 2003 and the Buckeyes are national champions, but not without controversy. In the blink of an eye, Miami went from back-to-back champions to a devastating overtime loss. Yet even this controversial ending would pale in comparison to what was to come in the 2003 season.
There's no contingency plan. Why isn't there a contingency plan that says, look, if you're the number one ranked team in both polls, forget about it. We've got to, it's never proactive. It's always reactive.
And it started immediately. The Buckeyes were looking to repeat behind their now sophomore star, Maurice Clarett. But by September, he was hit with a suspension that changed the course of the season and his career. Not long before that, Rick Neuheisel, who had raised a Rose Bowl only a few years prior, was suddenly fired due to gambling accusations. And then there was Mike Price, getting fired without even coaching a game yet due to a night at a topless bar and some. All of this, and we didn't even start the season. A season that would bring us some of the sport's most incredible players, legendary coaches, and games that changed the course of history. But going into August, the slate was clean and expectations were sky high, especially down at Auburn. They were primed to make a run with their trio of starbacks in Cadillac Williams, Brandon Jacobs, and Ronnie Brown. Georgia wasn't too far behind, especially with their star-studded defense led by David Pollack. Tennessee entered in the mix as the 12th ranked team, while LSU was aiming to take over the SEC like they had done only 2 years prior. Down in Florida, five-star freshman Chris Leak was prepping to take the reins from Gator legend Rex Grossman, while Bobby Bowden was focused on a rebound season after back-to-back down years. But Miami, loaded with returning defensive stars in Jonathan Vilma, Vince Wilfork, and Sean Taylor, may have been the hungriest team in Florida after feeling like they'd been robbed just months prior. They'd have to ward off some serious contenders in the Big East first, though, starting with Virginia Tech, led by their starback Kevin Jones and future pros on defense like D'Angelo Hall. Both of them would have to figure out a way to contain the nation's most talented player up in Pittsburgh, a sophomore superstar named Larry Fitzgerald. Not too far north, Michigan was positioning themselves to make a run with offensive star power in Braylon Edwards and Chris Perry, but they'd have to overcome those Buckeyes who had bested them in back-to-back years. Out west, we had Jason White ready to finally take over after brutal knee injuries, while the Sooner defense was loaded with defensive stars in Tommy Harris, Teddy Lehman, and Derek Strait. They'd have to once again get by Texas, though, who had pros in Cedric Benson, Roy Williams, Derek Johnson, and in a talented young man named Vince Young. Then there was Kansas State, who had arguably the most dynamic backfield duo in the country between L. Roberson and Darren Sproles. But out in Cali, Pete Carroll had USC officially back on the map after an Orange Bowl win. Carson Palmer was gone, but Matt Leinart was taking over as he was flanked by star receiver Mike Williams alongside a couple of ultra-talented freshman backs named Lendell White and Reggie Bush. Then there was that Hall of Fame quarterback class, starting with Eli Manning down in Mississippi, followed by Phillip Rivers at North Carolina State, and filled out with Ben Roethlisberger up in Miami of Ohio. But as the season kicked off, we'd get an initial matchup between two teams that would each go on to define the year. And it was Kansas State's Darren Sproles who immediately made the first statement with a massive run that led to a score. L had himself a day as well, putting together 350 total yards with 4 touchdowns. While Kansas State handled Cal, the second half gave us a first glimpse at a junior college transfer named Aaron Rodgers, who'd preview that Hall of Fame arm talent. But our first heavyweight fight of the year came 1 week later when USC traveled to Auburn with domination on their mind. Darnell Bing immediately picked off Jason Campbell, setting up Matt Leinart's touchdown to Mike Williams to kickstart his career, and then from there on out it was a rout as USC shut out the Tigers 23-0. Up north, the defending national champs wanted to make their own statement. Even without Clarett, who was watching on the sidelines, the Buckeyes dominated. Last season's hero, Craig Krenzel, would punch in 2 rushing touchdowns as the Buckeyes dominated the Huskies 28-9. But September is when the real fun began, as unranked Georgia Tech shocked the still wobbly Auburn Tigers with a 17-3 upset. 2003's Mac Attack kicked off as well, with Bowling Green stunning 16th ranked Purdue on a Josh Harris prayer. Unfortunately, Phillip Rivers' NC State would also fall victim as Wake Forest whipped the Wolfpack 38-24. The upset bug almost bit each of the top 3 teams, starting with Ohio State, who barely survived, needing a fourth quarter defensive stop to squeeze past San Diego State. Down in Alabama, top-ranked Oklahoma needed an onside recovery kick to escape the Crimson Tide. And in Miami, the third-ranked Hurricanes needed an opening kickoff return for a touchdown from Devin Hester, 164 yards out of Kevin Beard, 2 rushing touchdowns from Frank Gore, and a red zone last-stand interception to pull off a miraculous comeback against the Florida Gators. But as the top programs were surviving, Larry Fitzgerald ignited the awards race by kickstarting a truly unbelievable year with 3 touchdowns touchdowns in his opener against Kent State. He followed that up by going for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns against Ball State. But Larry wasn't the only one to immediately make an early claim for the Heisman. Michigan's star senior running back made his own claim with a 177-yard, 4-touchdown performance in a 38-0 beatdown over 15th-ranked Notre Dame. Jason White wanted in on the action too, throwing 4 touchdowns as the Sooners recovered with a 52-point outing against Fresno State. While not yet the star he'd become, Reggie Bush previewed his explosiveness with over 100 total yards and 2 touchdowns as USC blew past Hawaii 61-32, but Hawaii would get the last laugh at the end of the day. Meanwhile, out in Texas, Roy Williams was planning to make his own Heisman case, but it'd be Arkansas's dual-threat quarterback, Matt Jones, and their running back, Cedric Cobbs, who'd stun the Longhorns with a 38-28 upset. Up in Ohio, Phillip Rivers gave it his all to throw his name into the hat with a statement win at Ohio State. He led a fourth-quarter comeback that saw him throw 2 touchdowns, including one with just 21 seconds left, but the Buckeye defense made a clutch goal line stand to secure a 44-38 triple overtime win. And they weren't the only top 10 team to barely get by, as the 10th-ranked Seminoles needed a last-minute interception to escape that dangerous Georgia Tech team. But the Saturday of September 20th gave us the full-blown MAC attack starting in Tuscaloosa. In their first ever meeting, Northern Illinois delivered a brutal blow to the Crimson Tide with a 19-16 upset win. Not to be outdone, future Steeler Bruce Gradkowski canceled out Larry Fitzgerald's 200-yard performance by throwing for 461 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 35-31 comeback win over 9th-ranked Pitt. And Marshall completed the trifecta by shocking the 6th-ranked Wildcats 27-20. Bowling Green came a possession away from making it a Fantastic Four weekend for the MAC, but once again, the Buckeye defense was the difference as they made a stand when the team needed them the most. Their rivals, the Michigan Wolverines, weren't so lucky in their trip to Oregon. Braylon Edwards went off for 144 yards, but an early Oregon punt return, followed by a late game-changing blocked punt, ended up being the difference as they sunk Chris Perry's Wolverines 31-27. Meanwhile, down in SEC country, we got our next real heavyweight bout between LSU and Georgia. Both defenses were smothering for most of the game. The only real separator was an explosive Chiron Carey run. That is until Matt Mock's brutal fourth-quarter fumble, followed by a 93-yard screen pass that gave the Bulldogs new life. But Mock previewed championship resolve by rebounding with a beautiful deep ball to Skylar Green for the lead. Saban's defense shut the door closed as Corey Webster's pick sealed the win. But the end of September would give us the first real earthquake of the season, which was onset by a barrage of special teams and defensive scoring explosions that started in Boston. Roscoe Parrish showed Miami's speed could strike at any moment with a 90-yard punt return touchdown, while Sean Taylor snagged the first of his record-setting pick sixes that year with a 70-yarder. But Antonio Perkins wasn't impressed, as he didn't just take 1 punt return to the house, nor did he take 2 punt returns to the house. No, incredibly versus UCLA, he took back a record 3 punt returns in a historic 59-point win. And you know, in this week of special teams performances, Beamer Ball had to jump in. 1 week after Kevin Jones led the way versus Texas A&M, the defense showed out against Dan Orlovsky's UConn. First, it was a pick 6, then the special teams followed it up with a 90-yard kick return, capped off with a blocked punt for a touchdown. But of all those performances, the winner of this little weekly contest had to be Washington State's 9 turnover performance against Oregon. Not only did they recover 2 fumbles, but they also picked Oregon off 7 times and threw in a couple blocked punts just for the fun of it. Derek Johnson must have been inspired because he grabbed 2 picks and a fumble recovery for himself, all while Vince Young previewed that rare dual threat ability that eventually would turn him into a legend. Yet all those performances would fall shy of the insane 94 points scored between Ole Miss and Texas Tech. Eli threw for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. But BJ Simmons had the game of the week, if not the year, as he threw for a jaw-dropping 661 yards and accounted for 7 total touchdowns in the come-from-behind win. While those two had the Davey O'Brien Award in mind, Rivers had something to say. He didn't go for 600 yards, but he did get 400 as he led NC State over UNC at home for the first time since 1991. Yet, the best individual performance may have been Larry's against Texas A&M. After 2 touchdowns earlier in the game, he grabbed an incredible over-the-shoulder touchdown in double coverage to secure the win for Pitt. But for all those fireworks, none had the impact of this game out in Berkeley. Aaron Rodgers, now the starter, quickly set the tone with an opening touchdown. He followed that up with 2 touchdown passes in the second to give Cal a stunning 21-7 lead, but the halftime lead could have been even worse if not for his costly interception and a botched snap fumble, both inside USC's territory. He let USC hang in there, and after his pick 6 in the third, he was out of the game with a re-aggravated injury, and it was all tied up at 21. With Leinart having a bad day, he needed his defense to bail him out, and All-American Sean Cody did exactly that with a blocked field goal late in the fourth that ultimately set up USC's game-tying field goal. But after a brutal overtime fumble, USC's defense would have to save them again. However, the Trojans ran out of lives in the third overtime as a missed field goal set up Cal to finally hit their game winner to pull off a win that would go on to define the year. But October upped the ante by shaking things up in the North, the East, and most importantly, in the South. However, first, USC was on a mission to rebound after that Cal loss, and did so in the month of October behind their freshman Lendell White, who'd go off for 140 yards and 2 scores against Arizona State. Mike Williams then continued to show he was a real problem, especially in the Stanford game, where he was unguardable. Leinart went for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Fighting Irish, and Bush showcased his incredible ability with a 270 total yard performance against Washington. And they weren't the only ones rebounding after tough losses. Georgia's defense wiped the taste out of their mouth from that LSU loss by legitimately injuring Alabama in a 37-23 win. As the Bulldogs were burying the Crimson Tide, L. Robertson was putting in work on the Longhorns, but Vince Young made clutch plays down the stretch, snatching a win for Texas on a 4th down QB sneak. However, elsewhere, upsets were brewing, starting in Miami. The Canes defense kept making plays, but the offense got hit with a huge blow when Frank Gore went down with another knee injury, and Brock Berlin just could not stop throwing the ball to the other team. Thankfully for Canes fans, he would bounce back in this game with a massive 4th quarter drive that set up the Hurricanes' game-winning field goal before Sean Taylor sealed it with a pick. Nearby, Florida wasn't as lucky as Eli led his Rebels on a big 4th quarter drive before the defense sealed the upset win over the Gators. Out in Alabama, the 1-2 punch of Ronnie Brown and Cadillac Williams got Auburn back on track against Tennessee, but it'd be a crucial last-minute interception from star cornerback Carlos Rogers that shut down Tennessee's comeback attempt. That Tiger defense would come up clutch in back-to-back weeks, sealing another top 10 upset, this time against Arkansas. Up north, Michigan came out firing against Iowa behind Braylon Edwards, but Chandler's big-time throws and Iowa's stout defense sent the Wolverines' title chances officially crashing. Out west, Alex Smith put on a 350-yard performance versus Oregon to give Urban Meyer his first major win at Utah, but the Saturday of October 11th took the upsets and thrillers to another level. A Rivers-Orlovsky duel started us off, ending with a gut-wrenching, game-losing pick from Orlovsky. Out in Pittsburgh, Larry kept it up with 2 touchdowns against Notre Dame, but Julius Jones was like an unstoppable freight train, putting on a school record performance that earned the upset win and put another ding in Larry's Heisman campaign. Meanwhile, chaos broke out starting up north between Michigan and Minnesota. The dynamic duo of Marion Barber III and Lawrence Maroney had Minnesota firing out of the gates, but Michigan's own 2 superstars in Edwards and Chris Perry helped the Wolverines drop 31 4th quarter points as they capped off the comeback win with a game winner to keep their title hopes just barely alive. Next door in Wisconsin, the 3rd-ranked Buckeyes looked like they'd also find a way to escape an upset, but their repeat chances officially went on life support after Lee Evans caught a late 4th quarter 80-yard touchdown that secured the win and had the Badger faithful tearing down their goalposts. Yet next week, after a Michael Jenkins punt return and a blocked punt touchdown gave the Buckeyes a top 10 win over Iowa, combined with Braylon's "You Got Moss" touchdown and great defensive play, earning Michigan a top 10 win over Purdue, both Ohio State and the Wolverines were on a collision course for a massive November showdown that could potentially have a trip to the title on the line. But before that, we got another top 10 shakeup down south as Florida's defense stifled the Tigers, while Chris Leak had the game of his young career to stun LSU with the upset win. But that Florida loss ended up waking a sleeping giant as LSU proceeded to blow the doors off South Carolina before derailing that surging Auburn team with a dominant 31-7 statement win. Like LSU, Georgia kept their comeback tour rolling with a defensive clinic that saw the Bulldogs take a back-breaking fumble to the house right before the half, while picking off Clawson multiple times to grab the SEC East lead with a win over Tennessee. Yet they almost ruined their entire season in shocking fashion against UAB, needing a late field goal to barely inch by the Blazers. But out west, Oklahoma was cruising through October as White's Heisman campaign officially took off. He started the month tossing 5 touchdowns against Iowa State, then put on a clinic against Texas, going for 4 scores with only 4 incompletions as the Sooner defense forced 6 turnovers to earn a 65-13 win over 11th ranked Texas. White kept it rolling as he threw for a pair of touchdowns against Missouri, while Antonio Perkins added yet another punt return touchdown in Oklahoma's 34-13 win. And White finished the month with 3 more scores against Joel Klatt's Colorado Buffaloes, putting him in great position to make a run at the Heisman. But back on the same day the Sooners steamrolled Texas, Miami and Florida State locked horns in yet another top 10 matchup between these two programs. In this rain-soaked version, Sean Taylor gave us an all-time performance. He first recovered a block punt, then picked off Ricks to start the second, before capping it off with a pick 6 right before half. That defensive performance would lead the Canes to a massive 22-14 win. And after the offense showed some life the following week, Miami looked like they could very well be on their way to a 3rd straight title game. But they'd have to get past those Hokies, and they were rolling. They kick-started October with a 48-point beatdown over Rutgers. D'Angelo Hall then took back 2 punts to the house as they dropped 51 on Syracuse. But just 1 week out from a top 3 matchup with Miami, the Hokies collapsed. Like Miami all year, the Hokie defense made plays, but it was just one mistake after the next from the Hokie offense. In total, it'd be 4 turnovers that seemed to knock Virginia Tech out of the race. But then the Hokies flipped November on its head as their defense finally buried the lifeless Canes offense. Brock, once again, continued almost blindly throwing it to the other team, costing Miami not just once, but twice with 2 horrific throws. And just like that, the month started with Miami's 39-game win streak snapped, their title chances on life support, and the Hokies right back in the conversation. But the Canes weren't the only team to go down on that Saturday. In the 0-3 version of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, the Gator defense came out firing. But the real hero may very well have been the man who replaced Brock, as Chris Leak, the freshman, put together a clutch 4th quarter drive that got the Gators within striking distance to hit the game-winning field goal and knock their bitter rivals off. Penn State looked like they were about to do the same to Ohio State, especially when Krenzel went down after a massive hit. But backup quarterback Scott McMullen came in and delivered, along with a little bit of luck on his side, ultimately hitting Michael Jenkins in the end zone to avoid disaster. Michigan, too, would need its stars to deliver to survive their own scare. They got 2 big-time touchdowns out of Edwards, and 1 bruising run after the next from Perry, who carried the ball an insane 51 times. But that Michigan State Spartan defense wanted an upset, and almost got one if that last-second Hail Mary went the other way. But that week's fireworks may have been that much more memorable. Arkansas in Kentucky's game was ridiculous. We even saw a TD from future Eagles tackle Jason Peters. Big Jared Lorenz was making one play after the next, but his fumble in the 7th overtime would cost the Wildcats as Arkansas finally won on a basketball score-like final. 2 future pros gave us a thriller in North Carolina. Rivers threw it all over the field, going for 410 yards and 4 touchdowns, while Matt Shaw matched him, nearly putting up just as much. Ultimately, the nail in the coffin was something Texas fans would come to know, a Matt Shaw pick 6. Down in Texas, Vince Young started to really look like a future legend, giving us the type of highlights he became known for, as the Longhorns took out a top 10 Nebraska team. Meanwhile, the Seminoles were suddenly back in the title picture after smoking Notre Dame 37-0. The team directly in front of them started firing on all cylinders. Matt Leinart to Mike Williams was a lethal combo, combined with a ferocious defense, as the Trojans came out of the Washington State game looking like the top team in the country. But Oklahoma said we have just as much horsepower, all while their defense absolutely rocked Oklahoma State. Yet White had an average game, only going for 194 yards with 2 picks, which opened the awards race door for a surging Eli Manning, who went for nearly 400 yards and 3 touchdowns as he led Ole Miss to a 5-0 record in the SEC for the first time since 1963. But the Heisman leads was Larry's for the taking. He was on an insane streak and kept it up against Boston College, ultimately finishing with another touchdown and a massive stat line in Pitt's 24-13 win. But as the awards race was heating up, the title picture became much clearer. Mistakes crashed Florida State's chances as Clemson took out the 3rd-ranked Seminoles 26-10. Their rivals' time had come too. At this point, Brock's passes had a magnet to the other team. If it wasn't a pick, it was a fumble, or even worse, an inexcusable throw in the red zone on 2nd down. But sadly, a Sean Taylor muff punt was the dagger for the Canes, as their title hopes officially evaporated. separated. While 3 and 4 went down, Larry took aim at number 5. However, Kevin Jones wasn't having it, almost single-handedly putting the Hokies on his back. But again, Pitt had Fitzgerald, who marched the Panthers down on a fourth quarter drive to get the go-ahead touchdown before his defense sealed the third upset with a pick. With that Heisman-worthy performance, Eli had to keep pace, and he came out firing against Auburn, throwing 2 big touchdowns against the Tigers, but Cadillac Williams was running all over the Rebel defense. Eli would have to deliver yet another fourth quarter drive, while he benefited from a brutal Auburn drop and a defensive stand to seal the win, as Eli celebrated it and his Heisman chances. White responded with a near-perfect game. He threw for 5 touchdowns as the combo of him and Clayton proved deadly, all while the Sooner defense continued to look like the best in the country, shutting out Texas A&M for their worst loss ever, 77-0. So just like that, in the final 3 weeks, both races were on. At this point, Larry could not be stopped. It was one highlight catch after another as he put on an incredible 9-catch, 185-yard, 2-touchdown performance. But his campaign's Achilles heel was, well, the rest of his team, as Pitt got another loss on his resume at the hands of West Virginia. He would add another 7 for 102 and 2 touchdowns against Temple, and kept his touchdown streak alive in a quiet performance against Miami, but the losses were piling up, which was a real problem when compared to the man on an undefeated streak, and who was throwing touchdowns as he pleased, like his 4 touchdowns in a beatdown over Baylor, before ending the regular season with 4 more on nearly 400 yards against Texas Tech. But Eli wanted in on the action as well, trying to put a massive notch on his belt with an LSU upset, but a missed field goal and an untimely trip sank his chances for a major boost. With that Tiger win, they stayed in the title race tied with Ohio State, who also would lean on their defense in a big-time matchup against Purdue, as that unit made 2 massive plays for the Buckeyes. But then a blocked game winner looked like Ohio State's time was about to run out, until the winds blew right for the Buckeyes, but not for the Boilermakers in overtime. With Michigan rolling through Northwestern, the 0-3 version of the game would have a chance to dictate the season, as all eyes turned towards the Big House, and you could feel the tension as things got chippy quick. In hindsight, Gamble probably shouldn't have gone at Edwards, as he didn't grab just 1 touchdown, but grabbed 2 for Michigan. And with Perry grinding it out on the ground, the Wolverines proved to be too much as they finally snapped that 2-year loss streak to the Buckeyes. With the Buckeyes now officially eliminated, all eyes turned towards that LSU-USC comparison. In LSU's corner, they had beaten 7th-ranked Georgia, smacked 21th-ranked Auburn, and got a W against 15th-ranked Ole Miss. In USC's corner, they beat Auburn just as bad, but only had 1 other ranked win in their beatdown of 6th-ranked Washington State. Each had a devastating loss. USC's heartbreaker to California, while LSU had that tough loss to Florida. But both also absolutely steamrolled their last November opponent, with USC dropping 47 on UCLA, while LSU hung 55 on Arkansas. Each would have their title hopes come down to one final crucial Saturday, yet neither expected the outcome to fall completely outside of their control. But December kicked off with a Thursday night Big Ben showcase. After an incredible year where he put the Redhawks on the map, Big Ben was ready to finish the season off as MAC champions, and he put on a show in the first half, going for over 230 yards and 3 touchdowns, before delivering more of the same in the second, to win one of the greatest MAC seasons championships, and beg the question, why couldn't they compete in a playoff? But the honor of playing in the championship was likely going to USC, who made a final case with strong defensive play, along with the unstoppable Liner to Williams connection, as they looked like a sure thing with a 52-point outing against Oregon State. However, LSU had something to say about that. They went into the SEC championship game and put on a clinic versus Georgia. Justin Vincent was a runaway train, leading LSU to a dominant win over 5th-ranked Georgia that had the Tigers thinking they'd done just enough to earn the Sugar Bowl bid. And earlier that day, Notre Dame gave them a massive boost. That is, by hurting USC's strength of schedule by getting absolutely dominated by Syracuse. To make matters even worse for USC, another one of their opponents was getting smacked. That's right, a Hawaii versus Boise State game at midnight had the season hanging in the balance. And to LSU's delight, Boise State pulled out the win to give USC's strength of schedule yet another ding. But that conversation may have been pointless thanks to Kansas State, as the Wildcats went into the Big 12 championship game and shocked the world. Darren Sproles put on a show, going for nearly 350 total yards, while his defense owned White, giving him a terrible last outing before the Heisman voting. When the dust settled, Kansas State had just taken the Big 12, potentially White's Heisman, and possibly the Sooners' title hopes. But ultimately, the BCS system would decide. And although the coaches poll liked USC and LSU, as did the AP poll, the BCS system decided the exact opposite, creating the very situation it was designed to avoid at all costs. The outrage was instant.
My opinion, guys, strictly my opinion, I believe that the BCS is now irrelevant, completely irrelevant.
Oklahoma did did not win their conference championship game. Why are they playing for the national championship?
Yet USC, the consensus #1 team, would have to settle for the Rose Bowl, while LSU would meet Oklahoma in the BCS National Championship. But before we got to the bowls, it was time to see which player would win the hardware. Jason White kicked things off by beating Rivers and Eli for the Davey O'Brien Award, and Larry took home the Blitnikoff Award, but Eli stunned everyone by taking home the Maxwell Award, which made it seem like the Heisman was anyone's to win. But ultimately, it'd be Jason White who took home the honors, besting Larry Fitzgerald in one of the closest races to date and completing his comeback story that started with a torn ACL all the way back in 2001. We then got an embarrassment of riches from all sorts of future NFL stars in the bowls. Big Ben capped off his historic season with a 49.4 touchdown win. Next up was Phillip Rivers, who went for nearly 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. Steven Jackson even got in on the action with a bowl record 5 touchdown performance. But the most impressive game may have gone to Aaron Rodgers in the Insight Bowl, as he was doing it with both his arm and his legs, as he led the Golden Bears on a final clutch drive that set up a game-winning field goal to beat Virginia Tech. Then there was Larry's, hoping to extend his insane touchdown streak, but Virginia finally shut him down as they snapped the streak in the win. That left Eli, who threw 2 passing touchdowns and even snuck in a rushing one, to finish his stellar career off by getting comparisons to his brother Peyton. Then came the BCS Bowls, where Miami and Florida State gave us history with their first ever bowl meeting, and history came back to haunt the Seminoles, as another missed field goal would ultimately cost them in the Orange Bowl. The team that had beat Miami just 1 year ago found themselves in another Fiesta Bowl classic. After going up big in the first half, the Buckeyes suddenly needed a last-minute stand, and just as they did last year, their defense would step up, knocking down a Hail Mary attempt to secure the win. But then we had our national championships, and USC was out to make a statement. The special teams blocked the kick in the first, the defense was all over Navarre, sacking him before picking him off, all while the offense laid it on him, even pulling off the Philly special. In the end, they were Rose Bowl champions, and as the #1 team in the country, they had a rightful claim to be national champions.
I think we just won the national championship.
Sugar Bowl, the Heisman winner would square up with a defensive mastermind to technically take home the official national championship. In the beginning, it was the defenses making plays, with LSU following Oklahoma's turnover with a pick. LSU's Skylar Green would punch in a score before Oklahoma's blocked punt got them on the board shortly after. But the difference was a shifty Justin Vincent and a dominant Marcus Spears, who even got himself a pick 6 that set a school record. OU clawed back and had their chances in the fourth, but that Tiger defense slammed the door shut once again, giving Nick Saban, the legend, his first national championship. But the memory of 2003 is one of failure. The system designed to give us one undeniable truth once again gave us the exact opposite, this time in split fashion. But what are your thoughts on the 2003 season? What was your favorite moment? Which legends do you wish could go back and suit up just one more time? And if you enjoyed watching this video, I think you'll like this next one as well.